Captain Rachel Hayes sat in the briefing room at Camp Leoyne, staring at the weather radar on the screen. The massive storm system, covering the Atlantic Ocean, looked like a swirling monster, with winds reaching over 100 miles per hour and waves as tall as buildings. It was the kind of storm that kept experienced pilots grounded. "This is Hurricane Patricia," the meteorologist explained, pointing at the red and purple sections on the radar. "Category 4, possibly strengthening to Category 5 within hours. No aircraft should be anywhere near this system." Rachel had been a Marine Corps helicopter pilot for 8 years. She had flown in dangerous conditions before, through sandstorms in Iraq and over mountains in Afghanistan. But she had never seen a storm quite like this one. The briefing officer, Major Collins, stood up with a grim expression. "We have a situation. A Marine reconnaissance team of 6 soldiers is stranded on a small research station on Hatteras Island. The station is on the Outer Banks, directly in the hurricane's path. The storm surge is expected to completely submerge the island within 3 hours." Everyone in the room understood what that meant. If those Marines weren't evacuated soon, they would drown. "Why can't we use boats?" another pilot asked. "The seas are too rough. Waves are already over 20 feet high and getting worse. Coast Guard has declared the waters too dangerous for rescue operations. They won't risk their crews." "What about waiting until the storm passes?" someone else suggested. Major Collins shook his head. "The research station sits only 8 feet above sea level. Storm surge predictions show water levels reaching 15 to 20 feet. By the time the storm passes, there won't be anything left to rescue." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what was being asked, even though no one had said it directly yet. Someone would have to fly into that hurricane to save those Marines. "I need a volunteer," Major Collins said quietly. "I won't order anyone to take this mission. The risks are too high. Anyone who attempts this rescue has less than a 50% chance of making it back alive." Rachel looked around the room. There were 12 pilots present, all experienced and capable. But most of them had families waiting at home. Most of them had children who needed their parents to come back safely. Rachel was different. She lived alone with her rescue dog. No husband, no kids, no one depending on her except the Marines she served with. She had always been the one willing to take the dangerous missions, the one who volunteered when others hesitated. But this was different. This wasn't just dangerous. This was likely suicide. She thought about those 6 Marines stranded on that island, watching the water rise around them, knowing they had been abandoned because the storm was too deadly to risk a rescue. She thought about what she would want if she was in their position. Rachel raised her hand. "I'll go." Major Collins looked at her with concern. "Captain Hayes, you understand what you're volunteering for? That storm will tear apart most aircraft. Even if you make it to the island, landing in those winds will be nearly impossible, and the flight back will be even worse." "I understand, sir," Rachel replied firmly. "But those Marines deserve a chance. If there's even a small possibility I can get them out, I have to try." Several other pilots started to speak up, offering to go with her or take her place. But Rachel cut them off. "With all respect to everyone here, I'm the best pilot in this room," she said without arrogance, just stating a fact everyone knew was true. "I have the most experience flying in extreme conditions. If anyone has a chance of pulling this off, it's me. And I'm going alone because risking 2 lives instead of 1 doesn't make sense." Major Collins studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Captain Hayes, you have authorization for the rescue mission. But understand this. If conditions become completely impossible, if you reach a point where continuing means certain death, you are ordered to turn back. Those Marines know the risks of service. They wouldn't want you to die trying to save them if there's no chance of success." "Yes, sir," Rachel agreed. Though she already knew she wouldn't turn back, no matter how bad it got, the briefing continued with technical details. Rachel would fly a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, the most powerful and reliable aircraft they had. The flight to Hatteras Island would take approximately 45 minutes in normal conditions. But in the hurricane, it could take over an hour. Fuel would be tight. As the briefing ended and pilots began filing out of the room, several of them approached Rachel. Some shook her hand. Others hugged her. One older pilot, a man who had been flying for 20 years, had tears in his eyes. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest," he said. Rachel smiled slightly. "Maybe both." An hour later, Rachel stood next to her Black Hawk helicopter on the airfield. The wind was already picking up, and dark clouds rolled across the sky. Rain fell in sheets, and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the past hour. Her crew chief, Sergeant Martinez, was doing final checks on the aircraft. He looked worried. "Captain, this bird is in perfect condition, but I can't guarantee how she'll handle in hurricane-force winds. No helicopter is really designed for what you're about to fly into." "I know," Rachel replied, "but she's tough, and so am I. We'll make it work." Martinez handed her a sealed envelope. "Major Collins asked me to give you this," he said, "to read it before you take off." Rachel opened the envelope and found a handwritten note. "Rachel, you're one of the finest pilots I've ever commanded. Whatever happens today, know that your courage honors every Marine who has ever served. Give those boys a chance to see their families again. Godspeed." Rachel folded the note and tucked it into her flight suit. She climbed into the helicopter, strapped herself in, and began the startup sequence. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. Cutting through the rain and wind through her headset, she heard Major Collins's voice. "Captain Hayes, you are cleared for takeoff. All of us here are praying for you and for those Marines. Bring everyone home safe." "Roger that, sir," Rachel responded. "See you in a few hours." She pulled back on the collective control, and the Black Hawk lifted off the ground. As she turned, the aircraft stormed the storm, heading directly into the dark wall of clouds and chaos ahead. Rachel took a deep breath. "All right, Patricia," she said to the hurricane. "Let's dance." The first 20 minutes of flight were rough, but manageable. Rachel flew low over the coastline, watching the ocean grow more violent with each passing mile. Waves crashed against the shore with tremendous force, sending spray high into the air. Trees bent almost horizontal in the wind. Rachel's hands gripped the controls tightly as the helicopter shook from wind gusts. She constantly adjusted her course, fighting to keep the Black Hawk steady. Rain hammered against the windscreen so hard she could barely see more than a few hundred feet ahead. "Camp Lejeune, this is Rescue 1, Rachel spoke into her radio. "I've entered the outer bands of the storm. Visibility is poor but manageable. Continuing toward Hatteras Island." "Copy that. Rescue 1, the radio crackled back. "Weather radar shows you're about to hit the heaviest section. Be advised. Wind speeds in your path are measuring over 90 miles per hour. Rachel checked her instruments. The Black Hawk was built to handle strong winds, but 90 miles per hour was pushing the absolute limits. She reduced her airspeed, trading speed for stability. Then the storm truly hit. One moment Rachel was flying through heavy rain and strong winds. The next moment, it felt like a giant hand grabbed the helicopter and tried to shake it apart. The Black Hawk dropped suddenly, falling nearly 100 feet in seconds. Rachel's stomach lurched as she fought the controls. Pulling the aircraft back to level flight, wind screamed around the helicopter. The noise was deafening even through her helmet. Rain didn't just fall anymore, attacked from every direction at once. Driven by winds that changed direction without warning, a massive gust hit from the side, tilting the Black Hawk at a 45-degree angle. Rachel's training took over. She didn't fight the wind directly. Instead, she used the helicopter's momentum, letting it roll slightly with the gust while making tiny corrections to prevent a complete rollover. The maneuver worked, but it cost her altitude. She was now flying only 300 feet above the violent ocean below. Any lower and the waves might reach up and grab her. "Rescue 1, your altitude is critically low," the radio warned. "Recommend climbing to safer height." "Negative," Rachel responded through gritted teeth. "Higher altitude means stronger winds." "I'm staying low." Another violent gust hit, this time from below, lifting the helicopter like a toy. Rachel's head slammed against the side of her helmet despite her restraints. Stars flashed in her vision, but she blinked them away and focused on the instruments. The GPS showed she was getting close to Hatteras Island. Visibility was now almost zero. She was flying blind, trusting her instruments completely because looking out the window showed nothing but gray chaos. Rescue 1. We've lost visual tracking on your position, the radio said. Concern evident in the controller's voice. Can you confirm your location? Rachel checked her GPS coordinates. I'm approximately 5 miles from the research station. Beginning descent for landing approach? Rescue 1. Radar shows wind gusts in your immediate area, reaching 105 miles per hour. Those are Category 5 hurricane winds. Abort the mission. Repeat, abort, and return to base. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She knew they were right. These wind conditions were beyond what any helicopter could safely handle. Attempting to land in this storm was insane. But she had come this far. Those Marines were so close. She couldn't turn back now. Camp Leon, she finally replied. I'm continuing the mission, Captain Hayes. That's an order. Return to base immediately. Rachel reached down and switched off her radio. She couldn't afford the distraction of people telling her to quit. She needed to focus completely on flying. The island appeared through the storm like a ghost. Rachel could barely make out the shape of buildings below, surrounded by rising water. The research station sat on what looked like a small hill, but the ocean was already creeping up its sides. She circled once, looking for a place to land. The station had a small helipad, but it was exposed to the full force of the wind. Landing there would be incredibly dangerous. Rachel had no choice. It was the only option. She began her descent, fighting every foot of the way. The wind grabbed the helicopter and threw it sideways. She corrected. Another gust pushed her backward. She compensated. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster at 100 feet above the helipad. A massive wind gust hit from the left. The Black Hawk tilted violently. Rachel's training and instincts screamed at her to pull up, to gain altitude and try again, but she didn't have time for another attempt. The water was rising fast and her fuel was running low. She pushed forward on the controls, angling the helicopter down more steeply than normal. It was a dangerous maneuver, one that could end in a crash if she miscalculated even slightly. 50 feet. The wind tried to flip the helicopter. Rachel fought back. 30 feet. Rain obscured everything. She was landing blind, using only her instruments and instincts. 20 feet. The Black Hawk shook so violently that warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. 10 feet. Rachel pulled back on the controls, flaring the helicopter to slow its descent. 5 feet. She could see the helipad now, directly below her. The Black Hawk's landing gear touched down hard on the concrete pad. For a terrifying second, Rachel thought the wind would pick them up again and throw them into the ocean. She immediately reduced the rotor speed and engaged the emergency tie-downs, mechanical anchors that extended from the landing gear to grip the pad. The helicopter lurched, shuddered, but stayed on the ground. Rachel had made it. Against all odds, through winds that should have torn her aircraft apart. She had landed on Hatteras Island, but she knew the hard part wasn't over. Now, she had to load 6 Marines into the helicopter and fly back through that same deadly storm. She looked out through the rain-streaked windscreen and saw figures running from the research station building toward the helicopter. The Marines had seen her land. They were coming. Rachel said a quick prayer. Getting here was one thing. Getting everyone home alive would require a miracle through the storm's howling wind. She could hear her own voice, steady despite the fear. Okay, Rachel. You got here. Now get them home. She began preparing the helicopter for takeoff, knowing that, within minutes, she would attempt something even more dangerous than what she had just accomplished. She would try to fly an overloaded helicopter, carrying 7 people instead of the usual maximum of 4. Back through the worst storm she had ever seen, the Marines reached the helicopter and began pulling open the side doors. Rain and wind rushed into the cabin. Rachel turned in her seat to look at them. They were young, scared, but their eyes showed hope and gratitude. They had thought they were going to die on this island. And now, impossibly, someone had come to save them. One of the Marines. A corporal who looked barely 20 years old shouted over the wind, "Ma'am, you're insane for flying in this." Rachel smiled grimly. Yeah, I know. Now get in quickly. We're not out of danger yet. The 6 Marines scrambled into the helicopter, bringing sheets of rain and hurricane wind with them. They were soaked, exhausted, and several showed signs of minor injuries. One Marine, a sergeant with a nasty cut above his eye, immediately began helping the others strap in. Everyone secure? Rachel shouted over the roaring wind and engine noise. Secure, ma'am. The sergeant yelled back. Rachel glanced at her fuel gauge, and her heart sank. The flight here had used more fuel than expected because she had to fight the wind constantly. She had enough to get back to base, but barely. There was no margin for error, no fuel for a second landing attempt if the first one failed. She increased the rotor speed and felt the black. With 7 people aboard instead of the usual load, the helicopter was carrying significant extra weight. Every calculation she had trained for was now wrong. The aircraft would handle differently, respond more slowly, and require more power for everything. Rachel released the emergency tie-downs and pulled back on the collective control. The Black Hawk lifted off the helipad, immediately caught by the hurricane winds. The helicopter lurched sideways, and Rachel heard the Marines gasp in fear. Hold on tight, she yelled. It's going to be rough. Rough was an understatement. As soon as they cleared the island, the full force of Hurricane Patricia grabbed them. The helicopter dropped, climbed, tilted, and spun as wind gusts hit from every direction. Rachel's arms burned with effort as she fought the controls, making constant tiny adjustments to keep them in the air. One of the Marines in the back started vomiting from the violent motion. Rachel couldn't blame him. Her own stomach churned with every sudden drop and climb. How far to base? The sergeant shouted from the back. About 40 miles. Rachel replied. At this speed, maybe 45 minutes? What she didn't tell them was that 45 minutes in these conditions felt like an eternity, and she wasn't certain they would make it that long. The Black Hawk climbed to 500 feet, seeking slightly calmer air. But at that altitude, the winds were even stronger. A massive gust hit them broadside, and the helicopter rolled nearly 60 degrees. For a terrifying moment, Rachel thought they were going to flip completely over. She pushed the cyclic control hard to the right, adding power and using the rotor's momentum to fight the roll. Slowly, painfully, the Black Hawk righted itself. Behind her, she heard one of the Marines praying. She wanted to join him, but she needed all her concentration on flying. Rain hammered the windscreen with such force that the wipers were useless. Rachel was flying almost entirely by instruments now, trusting the GPS and altimeter to tell her where she was because her eyes told her nothing but gray chaos. Then disaster struck. A warning light flashed on Rachel's instrument panel. Engine temperature was rising rapidly. A piece of debris, probably torn loose by the hurricane, had damaged the engine intake. The Black Hawk's engine was overheating. No, Rachel muttered, watching the temperature gauge climb into the red zone. If the engine failed, they would fall from the sky. The helicopter might survive a controlled emergency landing on calm ground, but dropping into hurricane-force winds and violent ocean waves meant certain death for everyone aboard. Rachel reduced power slightly, trying to lower the engine temperature. But reducing power in these winds meant losing altitude. The Black Hawk began sinking toward the angry ocean below. Ma'am, are we descending? The sergeant asked, tension clear in his voice. Engine trouble, Rachel admitted. There was no point lying. I'm trying to manage it, but we might have to ditch in the ocean. The cabin fell silent, except for the roar of wind and rain. The Marines understood what ditching meant. In these seas, survival was unlikely, but Rachel wasn't ready to give up. She had come too far, risked too much. These Marines deserved better than dying within sight of the coast. She checked her GPS. They were 25 miles from base. So close, yet it might as well have been 1,000 miles if the engine quit. Camp Lejeune, this is Rescue 1, Rachel said into the radio, having turned it back on. I have 6 Marines aboard and we're heading home, but we have engine problems. Requesting emergency landing priority. The response came immediately. Rescue 1. Thank God you're alive. We thought we lost you. Be advised, The airfield is experiencing sustained winds over 80 miles per hour. Landing will be extremely dangerous. Everything about today has been extremely dangerous, Rachel replied with grim humor. What's one more impossible thing? The engine temperature continued climbing despite her efforts. Rachel made a decision. She would push through, maintain enough power to stay in the air, and hope the engine held together for 20 more miles. If it failed, at least they would be closer to shore where rescue boats might reach them. Another violent gust hit, and this time Rachel heard a sickening crack. She glanced at her instruments and saw the rotor system showing stress indicators. The hurricane was literally trying to tear her helicopter apart. "Come on, baby," Rachel whispered to the Black Hawk. "Just a little farther. You can do this." As if in response, the engine temperature stabilized. It was still dangerously high, but it stopped climbing. The helicopter had found some reserve of strength. Or perhaps Rachel's careful power management was working. Mile by painful mile, they pushed through the storm. Rachel's arms ached, her head throbbed from the constant noise and vibration, and her eyes burned from staring at instruments through the rain and darkness. But slowly, possibly, the storm began to ease. The winds were still dangerous, but they dropped from insane to merely terrifying. Rain that had been impenetrable curtains became heavy showers. Rachel could actually see a few hundred feet ahead now. "I see land." One of the Marines shouted. "That's the coastline." It was the most beautiful thing Rachel had ever seen. The familiar outline of the North Carolina coast appeared through the thinning storm clouds. They were going to make it. Camp Lejeune. Rescue 1 is 10 miles out with engine damage. Request emergency vehicles standing by at the airfield. Roger. Rescue 1. Fire trucks and ambulances are in position. You're cleared for immediate landing, any runway. Winds are 75 miles per hour, gusting to 90. Good luck, Captain. Rachel focused on the final approach. The hardest part of any flight is the landing, and landing a damaged helicopter in high winds with an overloaded cabin would test every skill she possessed. The airfield came into view. Rachel could see emergency vehicles with their lights flashing, positioned along the runway. Everyone was waiting for her. She began her descent, fighting wind gusts that tried to push her off course. The Black Hawk responded sluggishly to her controls, damaged and exhausted from the brutal flight. 500 feet. The engine temperature spiked again. Rachel ignored it. They were so close. 300 feet. A gust hit from the side, pushing them toward a hangar building. Rachel corrected hard. 100 feet. She could see people on the ground now, watching her approach 50 feet. The engine made a grinding noise. Warning lights flashed across her entire panel. 20 feet. Rachel flared the helicopter, bleeding off speed. The Black Hawk touched down hard on the runway. Not a perfect landing, but they were down. As soon as the wheels hit concrete, the engine made a horrible screeching sound and shut down completely. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. Rachel shut down all systems and pulled off her helmet. For a moment, she just sat there, unable to quite believe they had made it. The helicopter's doors flew open as emergency personnel rushed in. The Marines began climbing out, some of them kissing the ground as soon as their feet touched solid earth. Medical personnel checked them over while firefighters sprayed foam on the smoking engine. Rachel unbuckled her restraints and tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. The adrenaline that had kept her going for the past 2 hours was gone, replaced by complete exhaustion. Strong hands caught her as she stumbled. Major Collins and Sergeant Martinez helped her out of the helicopter. "You did it," Collins said, emotion thick in his voice. "You actually did it." Rachel looked back at the 6 Marines who were being led to waiting ambulances. They were alive, battered, but alive. She had flown into a hurricane that should have killed her, and she had brought all of them home. "Yeah," Rachel said softly. "We did it." The next morning, Rachel woke up in the base medical center. Her entire body ached, and she had a splitting headache. The flight surgeon had insisted she stay overnight for observation after her ordeal. When she opened her eyes, she found Major Collins sitting in a chair beside her bed reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled when he saw her awake. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a truck," Rachel admitted. Or maybe a hurricane. Collins chuckled. The doctors say, "You're fine, just exhausted and dehydrated. You should be released this afternoon." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Rachel, what you did yesterday was incredible. It was also the most reckless thing I've seen in 20 years of service." Rachel sat up slowly. "Did everyone make it? The Marines?" "All 6 are fine. Minor injuries, hypothermia, but they'll fully recover. You saved their lives." Collins stood and walked to the window. The storm passed overnight. Hatteras Island Research Station is completely underwater now. If you hadn't gotten them out when you did, they'd all be dead. "Then it was worth it," Rachel said simply. "Was it?" Collins turned to face her. "Your helicopter is destroyed. The engine seized completely. The rotor system is damaged beyond repair. You disobeyed a direct order to abort the mission. And according to the flight data recorder, you experienced conditions that should have killed you at least a dozen times during that flight." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. And I'd do it again." Collins sighed and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This is a formal reprimand for disobeying orders and reckless endangerment of military equipment. It goes in your permanent file." Rachel's heart sank. A formal reprimand could end her flying career. Then Collins smiled and tore the paper in half. "That's what regulations say I should give you. But here's what I'm actually recommending." He handed her a different document. "The Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. Your actions represent the finest traditions of Marine Corps aviation." Rachel stared at the recommendation letter, unable to speak. "The Navy Cross was an extraordinary honor rarely given. You're also being considered for promotion to major," Collins continued. "And there's something else. Those 6 Marines you saved? They want to meet you properly. They're waiting outside if you're up for visitors." Rachel nodded, still processing everything. Collins opened the door, and the 6 Marines filed in. They looked much better than they had during the storm clean, rested, and wearing fresh uniforms. The sergeant stepped forward first. "Captain Hayes, I'm Sergeant Tom Wilson. I wanted to thank you personally. You saved my life and the lives of my team. We were preparing to die on that island when we heard your helicopter coming through the storm. I've never seen anyone fly like that." The other Marines added their thanks, some with tears in their eyes. The young corporal, who had called her insane now, looked at her with complete admiration. "Ma'am, you're a hero," he said. "A genuine, no doubt about it hero." Rachel felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing my job. Any pilot would have done the same." "Oh, ma'am," Wilson disagreed respectfully. "Everyone else refused the mission. You were the only one willing to try. And not only did you try, you succeeded against impossible odds. That's not just doing a job. That's extraordinary courage." After the Marines left, Rachel sat alone with her thoughts. She had never sought glory or recognition. She flew helicopters because she loved it and because she wanted to serve. But hearing those Marines express their gratitude made her realize the profound impact of her choice. Over the next few days, as Rachel recovered, word of her rescue mission spread throughout the base and beyond. News media picked up the story. Headlines called her the hurricane hero and the Marine who defied death. Rachel gave one brief interview to the military newspaper, keeping her responses simple and humble. She deflected credit whenever possible, praising her training, her aircraft, and the support team back at base. But the public wasn't interested in humility. They wanted a hero, and Rachel had become exactly that. Letters began arriving at the base from across the country, families thanking her, children saying she inspired them, veterans praising her courage. One letter stood out. It was from the mother of Sergeant Wilson, the Marine she had rescued. "Captain Hayes, I will never be able to properly thank you for what you did. My son is my only child. His father died when Tom was 10 years old, and I raised him alone. When I got the call that he was trapped by the hurricane, I thought I was going to lose him too. I prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. And then you came. You risked your life for my son and his team. You are an angel sent to answer a mother's prayer. My family will be forever grateful. You gave me my son back. God bless you," Rachel cried when she read that letter. It reminded her why she had taken that impossible risk. Not for medals or recognition. but for moments exactly like this, mother getting to hug her son again. 2 weeks after the rescue, a formal ceremony was held at Camp Lejeune. The base commander, a 3-star general, presented Rachel with the Navy Cross in front of hundreds of assembled Marines and guests. The 6 rescued Marines stood in the front row, saluting as the medal was pinned to Rachel's dress uniform. The general's speech was brief, but powerful. Captain Hayes represents the very best of military service. When others said it couldn't be done, she found a way. When the easy choice was to walk away, she stepped forward. Her actions remind us all why we serve and what it means to leave no Marine behind. After the ceremony, Rachel was surrounded by well-wishers. Fellow pilots congratulated her. Junior Marines asked for her autograph. The base photographer took what felt like 1,000 pictures. Through it all, Rachel remained gracious but uncomfortable with the attention. She was ready to get back to work, back to being just another pilot in the squadron, but life had changed. She was no longer just Captain Rachel Hayes. She was the pilot who flew into a hurricane alone and brought 6 Marines home alive. That story would follow her for the rest of her career. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Lejeune, Rachel stood alone by the airfield. A new Black Hawk helicopter sat on the flight line, her replacement aircraft. She ran her hand along its side, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers. Ready for our next adventure? She asked the machine softly. The helicopter sat silent, but Rachel felt a connection to it already. They would fly together, face danger together, and hopefully save more lives together. Major Collins approached from behind. Admiring your new ride? Just getting acquainted, Rachel replied. She's got big shoes to fill. The old bird got us through hell. Thought she did, Collins agreed. The maintenance crew is mounting a memorial plaque on that damaged helicopter before it's retired. Your flight into Hurricane Patricia will be remembered for generations. Rachel looked at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Hurricane Patricia was dissipating over the Atlantic, its fury spent. The storm that almost killed her was now just another weather system, already being forgotten by most people. But for Rachel, for those 6 Marines, and for their families, that storm would be remembered forever. It was the day the impossible became possible because one person refused to quit. Sir, when can I get back to flying? Rachel asked. Collins smiled. Tomorrow, if you want. There's no storm forecast, so it should be a quiet day. Quiet sounds perfect, Rachel said, but both of them knew quiet wouldn't last. There would always be another emergency, another crisis, another moment when someone needed help desperately. And when that moment came, Rachel would be ready to answer the call, no matter how dangerous it might be, because that's what heroes do. 3 months after the hurricane rescue, Rachel's life had settled into a new normal. She flew regular training missions, mentored younger pilots, and tried to ignore the frequent media requests for interviews. The Navy Cross medal sat in a small frame on her apartment wall. Still feeling surreal, on a cold November morning, Rachel was conducting a routine training flight with a new pilot named Lieutenant James Chen. They were practicing emergency procedures over the coastal waters when her radio crackled to life. Captain Hayes. This is base operations. We have an urgent situation developing. Return to base immediately. Copy that, base. Returning now. Inside, she found a room full of officers gathered around computer screens, showing news coverage. Her stomach tightened when she saw what they were watching. A commercial cruise ship had suffered catastrophic engine failure during a storm. Much smaller than Hurricane Patricia, but still dangerous. The ship was taking on water and listing heavily. Over 2,000 passengers were aboard. The ship's position was in international waters, too far for most rescue helicopters to reach. Why am I here? Rachel asked Major Collins, who stood at the center of the room. Because you're the only pilot who's proven she can fly in extreme conditions over open ocean, Collins replied. The Coast Guard is coordinating the main rescue effort with ships and larger aircraft. But there's a complication. He pulled up a different image showing a small section of the cruise ship. 37 passengers are trapped in a lower deck compartment that's flooding. The ship's crew can't reach them, and that section will be completely underwater within 2 hours. The main rescue operation can't prioritize that compartment because they're focused on evacuating the accessible areas first. Rachel understood immediately. You need someone to insert onto a sinking ship, extract 37 people from a flooding compartment, and get them off before the ship goes down. In summary, yes, Collins confirmed. It's volunteer only, Rachel. After what you went through with Hurricane Patricia, no one would blame you for declining. Rachel thought about those 37 people trapped below deck. Hearing water rush in, knowing they were running out of time, she thought about how terrified they must be. I'll go, she said without hesitation. An hour later, Rachel was airborne in a specially configured Black Hawk equipped with rescue gear and additional fuel tanks. To rescue swimmers, Petty Officer Rodriguez and Petty Officer Jackson sat in the back, along with medical equipment and emergency flotation devices. The flight to the cruise ship took 90 minutes. As they approached, Rachel could see the massive vessel listing severely to one side. Surrounded by Coast Guard cutters and other rescue boats, smaller helicopters buzzed around like bees, lifting passengers from the upper decks. That's a bad list, Rodriguez observed from the back. Ship looks like it could roll at any moment. Rachel circled the ship, assessing the situation. The vessel was listing at nearly 30 degrees, making any landing on the helipad extremely difficult. Waves crashed against the tilted hull, and wind gusts buffeted the helicopter. Command, this is Rescue 2. I have visual on the target vessel. Landing on the helipad will be challenging, but possible. What's the status of the trapped passengers? Rescue 2, trapped passengers are in compartment D7, 3 decks below the waterline. Ship's crew reports water is chest-deep in that section and rising fast. You have approximately 90 minutes before complete flooding. Rachel positioned the helicopter over the tilted helipad. The deck crew had secured ropes across the landing surface to prevent her from sliding off. She began her descent carefully, compensating for the ship's angle. The Black Hawk touched down on the slanted deck, and Rachel immediately engaged the emergency anchors. Rodriguez and Jackson jumped out with their rescue gear and headed toward the superstructure where crew members waited to guide them. I'll hold position here, Rachel told them through the radio. Work fast. This ship feels unstable. Rodriguez and Jackson disappeared into the ship's interior. Rachel sat in her helicopter, feeling the entire vessel shudder beneath her as waves hammered against it. Every minute that passed made the situation more dangerous. Through her radio, she could hear the rescue swimmers communicating as they descended into the ship. Their voices were calm and professional, but she could hear the strain underneath. Water level is higher than reported, Jackson said. It's up to our shoulders down here, and the current is strong. These people are terrified. Can you reach them? Rachel asked. Working on it. The compartment door is jammed. We're trying to force it open. Rachel checked her fuel gauge. They had enough for the return flight, but barely. The longer they waited, the tighter margins became. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Rachel's anxiety grew with each passing second. The ship groaned and shifted beneath her, metal screaming under stress. Ow, we're through! Rodriguez's voice came through triumphantly. We have access to the passengers. Starting evacuation now. How many can you bring up at once? Rachel asked. 5 or 6 at a time? It's going to take multiple trips. Rachel did the math. 37 passengers, 6 at a time, meant at least 6 trips up from the flooded compartment. Even working quickly, that would take over an hour. And they didn't have an hour. Negative, Rachel decided. That's too slow. I'm coming in. Ma'am, you're the pilot. If something happens to you, we're all stranded here. And let's make sure nothing happens to me, Rachel replied. She shut down the helicopter's engine and climbed out. Grabbing emergency rope and flotation devices from the equipment locker, Rachel made her way into the ship's interior. Following the route Rodriguez had described, the corridors were tilted at crazy angles, making walking difficult. Water sloshed along the floors, and emergency lights flickered overhead. She descended 3 levels, entering increasingly flooded sections. By the time she reached compartment D7, water was up to her chest. The cold Atlantic water took her breath away. Inside the compartment, she found Rodriguez and Jackson trying to keep 37 panicked passengers calm. Men, women, and several children huddled together in the rising water, holding on to anything bolted down to avoid being swept away by the current. Captain Hayes. Rodriguez looked surprised. You shouldn't be down here. I'm exactly where I need to be, Rachel replied. Let's get these people out. We'll form a human chain up to the deck. Move them faster and safer. They organized quickly. Rachel positioned herself halfway up the flooded stairwell, creating a relay point. Rodriguez and Jackson brought passengers to her. She guided them up to the next level, where ship's crew members took over. Children came first. Rachel lifted a little girl who couldn't have been older than 6, water dripping from her soaked clothing. You're safe now, sweetheart, Rachel told her gently before passing her up the chain. One by one, they moved the passengers. An elderly couple who could barely walk through the chest-deep water, a pregnant woman in tears, a man with a broken leg who had to be carried. Each person represented a life saved, a family that wouldn't be destroyed by tragedy, but time was running out. The water level rose noticeably with each passing minute. What had been chest-deep was now nearly neck-deep. Some of the shorter passengers had to be lifted just to keep their heads above water. Faster, Rachel urged. This compartment is going to be completely flooded in minutes. They worked frantically, muscles burning from the effort of moving people through the water and up the tilted stairways. Rachel's hands were numb from the cold water, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. 25 passengers evacuated. Then 30. Then 35. 2 passengers remained when the ship suddenly lurched violently. A horrible grinding sound echoed through the hull. The vessel had shifted, rolling further onto its side. The compartment tilted at an even steeper angle. Water rushed in with renewed force, knocking Rachel off her feet. She went under, swallowing seawater, before Rodriguez grabbed her and pulled her up. The ship is rolling, Jackson shouted. We need to get out now. But 2 passengers remained in the compartment, an older man and his wife who had insisted others go first. They were now trapped in a corner as water filled the space rapidly. Rachel pushed toward them, fighting the current. She reached the couple just as water reached their chins. Come on, move. She grabbed the woman while Rodriguez took the man. Together they fought their way to the exit as water swirled around them. The compartment was now 90% flooded. In seconds, it would be completely submerged. They reached the stairwell and began climbing. Behind them, water filled the compartment entirely, closing off their escape route. They had made it out with literally seconds to spare. The 4 of them struggled up the tilted stairs, helping each other when someone slipped. The ship continued groaning and shaking, threatening to complete its roll at any moment. Finally, they emerged onto the main deck, where dozens of crew members and other rescuers waited. The last 2 passengers were immediately moved toward a Coast Guard rescue boat, everyone accounted for. A crew member shouted, "All personnel evacuate immediately." Rachel, Rodriguez, and Jackson ran for the helicopter. The ship was now listing at 45 degrees. Rachel knew from her training that once a ship reached this angle, complete capsizing was imminent. She climbed into the helicopter and began the startup sequence, her frozen fingers fumbling with switches. The rotors began turning, painfully slow at first. Come on, Rachel muttered. The ship lurched again. The helipad they were on tilted even further. The emergency anchors strained but held. The rotors reached full speed. Rachel released the anchors and pulled up on the collective. The Black Hawk lifted off the deck just as the ship gave one final, catastrophic roll. Behind them, the massive cruise vessel capsized completely, rolling onto its side with a sound like thunder. Waves exploded outward from the impact. Rachel flew clear, her hands shaking on the controls. They had made it. All 37 trapped passengers were safe, and they had escaped seconds before the ship went down. Rescue 2 to command, Rachel said, her voice somehow steady. Mission successful. All trapped passengers evacuated. Returning to base. In the back of the helicopter, Rodriguez and Jackson sat in stunned silence, processing how close they had come to being trapped on that ship. Finally, Jackson spoke. Captain Hayes, you just can't resist flying into the impossible, can you? Rachel smiled tiredly. Apparently not. Must be a bad habit. As they flew back to Wardland, Rachel reflected on the day's events. 3 months ago, it was a hurricane. Today, it was a sinking ship. She wondered what impossible challenge would come next. But whatever it was, she knew she would face it. Because saving lives wasn't just her job. It was who she was. 6 months after the cruise ship rescue, Rachel sat in a small coffee shop near the base, trying to enjoy a rare day off. She wore civilian clothes and hoped no one would recognize her. Fame had become exhausting. A woman approached her table hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Captain Rachel Hayes?" Rachel sighed inwardly, but smiled politely. "Yes, I am." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Patricia Wilson. My husband Tom was one of the Marines you saved from Hurricane Patricia. He talks about you constantly. I just wanted to say thank you. Our daughter was born 2 months ago. If you hadn't saved Tom, she would have grown up without a father. You gave our family a future." Rachel stood and hugged the woman, feeling her own emotions swell. "Congratulations on your daughter. What's her name?" "Rachel," the woman said with a smile. "We named her after you." After Patricia left, Rachel sat back down, staring at her coffee. Moments like this reminded her why the danger and exhaustion were worth it. Somewhere in the world, a little girl named Rachel would grow up with her father because of one impossible flight through a hurricane. Her phone rang. It was Major Collins. "Rachel, I know it's your day off, but can you come to the base? There's something you need to see." An hour later, Rachel stood in a conference room facing a panel of high-ranking officers, including a 2-star general she had never met before. "Captain Hayes, please sit," the general said kindly. "I'm General Morrison, and I've been reviewing your service record. It's quite remarkable." Rachel sat nervously. "Thank you, sir. Hurricane Patricia, rescue, the cruise ship evacuation. In your overall record of service have brought you to our attention for a special opportunity," Morrison continued. "We're creating a new rapid response aviation unit. This unit will handle emergency rescues in extreme conditions, situations where standard protocols say the mission is impossible." He slid a folder across the table to her. "We want you to command this unit. You'll hand-select your pilots and crew, establish training protocols, and be ready to respond anywhere in the world within hours." Rachel opened the folder, scanning the details. It was an incredible opportunity, but also a massive responsibility. "I'm honored, but I'm just a captain. Commanding an entire unit typically requires higher rank and more experience, which is why this comes with an immediate promotion to major," Morrison replied. "And frankly, Captain, you have more experience with impossible missions than officers twice your age. Your actions have proven you don't just survive extreme situations, you excel in them." Rachel thought about what this meant. More responsibility, more danger, but also more opportunity to save lives. She thought about the Marines on that island, the passengers trapped on that ship, and all the future emergencies where someone would need help when no one else could reach them. "Sir," Rachel said firmly, "the next few months were a whirlwind." Rachel assembled her team carefully, choosing pilots who combined exceptional skill with the courage to attempt dangerous rescues. She recruited Rodriguez and Jackson as permanent team members. She designed training scenarios that pushed everyone to their limits. The media continued following her story. A documentary was being made about the Hurricane Patricia rescue. A book publisher wanted her to write her memoir. Rachel declined most opportunities, preferring to focus on her work. One evening, as Rachel walked across the airfield toward her office, she saw a group of young Marine recruits gathered around one of the helicopters. Their instructor was telling them a story. Out. And that's when Captain Hayesick. Major Hayes nowled, flew her helicopter straight into Category 5 hurricane winds. Everyone thought she was crazy. Everyone thought she'd die. But she came back with all 6 Marines alive. The recruits listened with wide eyes, clearly inspired by the tale. Rachel smiled and continued walking, not wanting to interrupt. Let them have their hero story. Let them believe that courage and determination could overcome impossible odds. Because sometimes it actually could. In her office, Rachel found a letter waiting on her desk. It was from Sergeant Tom Wilson, the Marine she had saved from the hurricane. "Major Hayes, my wife told me she met you at the coffee shop. Thank you for being so kind to her. I wanted to update you on something. I'm being promoted to Staff Sergeant next month, and I've been assigned as an instructor at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center. I'll be teaching young Marines how to survive in extreme conditions. Every day I'll be passing on the lesson you taught me. Never give up, even when the situation seems hopeless. Thank you for giving me the chance to continue serving and to be there for my family. You changed my life in ways you'll never fully know." Rachel pinned the letter to her bulletin board next to several others from people she had helped over the years. These letters mattered more to her than any medal or promotion. Her phone buzzed with a message. "New emergency developing. Avalanche in Colorado. 12 hikers trapped. Local rescue teams can't reach them due to weather. Your team is being activated." Rachel stood, grabbed her flight jacket, and headed for the airfield. Her team would already be preparing the helicopter and gathering equipment. They had trained for moments like this, as she walked through the evening air. Rachel thought about how different her life was now compared to a year ago. Back then, she was just another pilot. Now she commanded a team dedicated to the impossible. But some things hadn't changed. She still flew to save lives. She still faced danger without hesitation. And she still believed that no mission was truly impossible if you had the courage to try. At the airfield, her team waited beside a Black Hawk helicopter with Rescue 1 painted on its side. Rodriguez gave her a thumbs up. Jackson was loading medical supplies. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Chen, was completing pre-flight checks. "Everyone ready?" Rachel called out. "Ready, Major?" They responded in unison. Rachel climbed into the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence. The familiar sound of the rotors spinning up filled her with purpose. This was where she belonged, not in offices or at ceremonies, but here, preparing to fly into danger to help people who had no other hope. As the helicopter lifted off into the darkening sky, heading toward the Colorado mountains and another impossible rescue, Rachel felt at peace. She had found her calling, her purpose, her reason for existing. Some people were meant for quiet lives of safety and comfort. That was fine, and the world needed those people too. But Rachel was meant for this for storms and danger, for impossible missions and desperate situations, for being the person who showed up when everyone else said it couldn't be done. She flew into the night, toward the mountains, toward people who needed help. And behind her, she left a legacy of courage that inspired others to believe in heroes, to trust in the impossible, and to never give up hope, even in the darkest moments. The little girl named Rachel would grow up hearing stories about the pilot she was named after. Other children would read about the hurricane hero in their history books. Future pilots would study her techniques and try to match her skill. But for Rachel Hayes herself, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that she got to do what she loved every single day. She got to fly. She got to help people. And sometimes when the situation demanded it, she got to prove that the impossible was just another challenge waiting to be overcome. The helicopter disappeared into the clouds, heading toward its next mission. And somewhere below, people looked up at the sound of rotors cutting through the night sky and felt a surge of hope. Because if Major Rachel Hayes was coming, it meant rescue was possible. No matter how desperate the situation seemed, she had flown into a deadly storm, alone to save Marines when no one thought she'd return alive. She had done it not once, but many times since. And she would keep doing it for as long as people needed saving and helicopters needed flying. That was who Rachel Hayes was. That was who she would always be. The pilot who never gave up. The hero who always came when called. The woman who proved that courage, skill, and determination could triumph over any storm.